Mordechai Feingold is a professor of the history of science in the California Institute of Technology. He has traveled far for this special occasion, and he's going to leave us again soon, so we're very glad that he has joined us. He is the author of numerous studies on the history of Arabic studies, in particular in early modern England. His most recent book is entitled, it came out a few months ago, Newton and the Origins of Civilization. And he is now engaged in a project, I don't know to what extent that will continue on Arabic studies, but a large project on the history of the Royal Society. And I will give him the floor immediately, please.
Thank you. I would like to thank Jan and Charles for inviting me not only to come to this delightful event, but to revisit my study of Arabic and Hebrew that I did 20 years ago. And obviously when you try to revisit your wretched past, you wonder whether you did it right or what did you miss. And I thought that I would try to reconstitute the nature of the English Orientalist community in a way that neither I nor Gerald Toomer, who were the only one who were interested in this topic before, did for various reasons, and try to find as much new material as possible to enable such an effort. And it's particularly interesting to do it in this group because all of my colleagues here are really trying to do things that were not done before, and I think at the end we will learn a great deal. So what I will offer is both a combination of reading and talking, presenting certain vignettes to show the richness of the topic and what can we do to continue. What research is needed in order to continue the investigation. So, on the 24th of March, 1608, William Ayres, fellow of Emmanuel College and one of the translators of the King James Version of the Bible, wrote a long letter to James Ussher, future Archbishop of Armagh, in which he sketched the contours of a projected learned defense of the Masoretic version of the Bible and the antiquity of the Hebrew vowel points. In his attempt to vindicate, I quote, the purity and integrity of the sources from the carelessness of copyists and conjectures of some critics, Ayres come to consider the acquisition of Arabic essential. However, in the absence of teachers, Ayres followed the common practice of many contemporaries. He thought to learn the language by resorting to Agostino Giustiniani's polyglot Psalter, decrypting the Arabic by comparing it to parallel Hebrew and Greek texts. Alas, Ayres grumbled, even with the assistance of Guillaume Postel's Arabic grammar, sent to him by Ussher, he had failed to overcome the difficulties inherent in the Psalter, nor did he consider additional labor worth the effort, for Giustiniani's Arabic version appeared to him based either on the Septuagint or the Vulgate translations, but not to Hebrew truth. A decade earlier, Ayres went on to commiserate, there had existed an opportunity to institute the study of Arabic at Cambridge, but it was dashed with the departure of the Jew, Philippus Ferdinandus, with whom he had intended to study the language. Not that he cared to become an Arabomaniac, as Clenardus was once what. Here I'm going to say quite a lot about Clenardus, so you'll be happy. So he was not eager to become an Arabomaniac, Ayres hastened to add, only to taste Arabic studies with the edge of his lips, so that he could judge more correctly on some other matters. Hence his delight upon receiving from Ambrose Ussher, James' brother, a transcription of a few Quranic passages, which he hoped would assist him in compiling a serviceable Arabic grammar. after describing his projected treatise, Erz concluded despondently, "I have not yet been able to do anything in Arabic which would be worthy of a work. Perhaps if I could use our mutual master Christman, or Bedwell in London, or rather your Ambrose in Dublin, as a teacher, face to face, I could, but I cannot." Erz's letter encapsulates the most salient features of the pursuit of Arabic during the early modern study of Arabic. Not only the subservience of such study to the interest of theology, but the scarcity of teachers and books, which rendered the inherent difficulty of the language all the more debilitating. Not that hardship per se was necessarily a deterrent, and I think this is a very important point that we missed. The pedagogical principles informing early modern humanist erudition as a whole accentuated the symbiotic relationship between hard work and proficiency. As Richard Hooker stressed in The Laws of Ecclesiastical Polity, the search of knowledge is a thing painful, and the painfulness of knowledge is that which makes the will so hardly inclinable thereunto. Isaac Barrow concurred, "If to get competent knowledge about few things, or to be reasonably skillful in any sort of learning be difficult, how much industry does it require to be well seen in many, or to have waded through the vast compass of learning? Such a quest would exercise and strain all our faculties in a painful study, and necessarily so, for knowledge is not innate to us, and the gods sell all things, that is, for pains, without which the best wit and greatest capacity may not render a man learned." Making virtue of necessity, therefore, commentators made the hardship inherent in the study of Arabic its selling point. Edward Kellett cited approvingly Daniel Heinsius's commendation of the Oriental languages, which he added are of infinite worth, most necessary to be studied, exacting as much labor and pains before they be gained, as they afford delight and profit spiritual when they are obtained. In fact, well-wishers created a mythology of those who attained mastery proprio marte, by their own industry and without assistance, thereby to inspire younger scholars. Pride of place was given to Nicholas Clanardus, whose heroic efforts to master Arabic in order to better understand Hebrew, it was always added, were described in considerable detail in Clanardus' Peregrinationum. Consider Thomas Urpinius's 1620 oration on the value of the Arabic language, wherein he enthused over Clanardus and Etienne Hubert, both of whom it was not too much trouble to undertake lengthy, dangerous, and costly journeys for the sake of Arabic. Those whose circumstances did not permit them to make such long and dangerous journeys, Joseph Schalliger and Isaac Casaubon, for example, nevertheless managed with great effort and application, and by taking any opportunity that presented itself at home, to make progress as far as they were able in acquiring the most serviceable knowledge of Arabic. Of course, compared to him, as Arnold taught us, was not too much. How fortunate, therefore, were the Leiden students to have Urpinius as their teacher. You have an opportunity such as they never had. You did not undertake dangerous journeys to the Orient, or torment yourself night and day over one or two pieces of paper at home without a guide, and worst of all, according to Clanardus, with only yourself as teachers. Thanks to the most noble governess of the university, you may make more progress every day than they did in a month. Subsequent Arabists often availed themselves of Urpinius' rhetorical flourish. In 1626, Matthias Passor, who studied with Urpinius' assistant, waxed eloquent over the heroic efforts of Clanardus to satiate his desire to acquire Arabic before assuring his auditors at Oxford that owing to his lectures, they would have no need to follow the extreme measures undertaken by Clenardus. 2 decades later, following the institution of Christian Ravius as lecturer in Oriental languages in London, Thomas Smith thanked Samuel Hartlib for enabling such a lectureship. We need no longer travel with Clenardus to Arabia, nor with others to other foreign parts to learn the language. Even more revealing is the case of Thomas Cotton, who in 1658 sent his son to learn Hebrew, Syriac, and Arabic with Robert Sheringham in Rotterdam. To motivate his son, Cotton furnished him with a copy of Clenardus' Epistolae, which he hoped would stir up his zeal toward the Arabic tongue. Presumably, as much as it had his own some quarter of a century earlier, when he had pursued the book upon the recommendation of Abraham Willock, when he embarked on the study of Arabic. Unfortunately, enthusiasm was often not enough. When in the early 1650s, Isaac Barrow and Samuel Sprint approached Abraham Willock for instruction, the ailing and impoverished professor did his best to discourage them. Hence, upon hearing how great difficulties they are to encounter and how few books were in the language and the little advantage that could be gotten by it, they laid aside their design. Barrow's friend and biographer, Abraham Hill, commented on Barrow's zeal and diligence, how in all his studies his way was not to leave off his design till he brought it to effect, except in Arabic, where he made an essay for a little while and then deserted it. And he never studied Arabic, even though he traveled to Constantinople and he stayed there for 2 years. Some were thus frustrated, thought to exculpate their failure by blaming the difficulty of the language as well as its irrelevance to the grand scheme of humanist learning. Case in point is John Hackett, Bishop of Coventry and Lichfield, who considered that he could never fix upon Arabian learning, finding it a dry and barren land where no water is, and having further discouraged as a young man by such as had plodded the most in it. Small wonder then that upon hearing his friend Claude Salmasius proclaim that he accounted no man solidly learned without a skill in Arabic and other Eastern languages, Hackett retorted by lamenting the sight of many talented men who, persecuted with Eastern languages so much as to neglect Western learning, and often their discretion as well. Hackett was emboldened to belittle the value of Arabic after both John Selden and Robert Creighton, the Regius Professor of Greek at Cambridge, had purportedly assured him that they should often read 10 pages of Arabic for one line of sense and one word of moment, further averring that these were no learning like to what scholars may find in Greek authors such as Plato, Plutarch, etc. Similar expressions abound. Several months before his death, on the 21st of March 1656, James Usher told John Evelyn how great the loss of time was the study of much Eastern languages, that except in Hebrew there was little fruit to be gathered of exceeding labor, that besides some mathematical books, the Arabic itself had little considerable. Several years later, upon receiving a request to recommend texts for the study of Oriental languages, John Worthington lamented the paucity of such books, without which the pains and time spent upon grammar will not receive a due recompense. His own pursuit of such languages, Worthington added, had been cooled by that very consideration, that there existed no printed books, only manuscripts, and those are kept close and are not for common use. Nor did Worthington care to trouble himself further about the keys when there was no treasure things to become at. For his part, Humphrey Prideaux turned down in 1691 an offer to succeed Edward Pocock as Laudian Professor of Arabic at Oxford, partly because he nauseated that learning and had resolved to lose no more time upon it. 3 decades later, Prideaux reiterated Worthington's observation, insisting that the study of Arabic cannot, without long and sedulous application, be attained unto. And it adds to the difficulty that most of the books to be made use of in this matter lie in manuscript, which cannot be easily come at or easily read. Such mixture of enthusiasm and gloom was common among early modern commentators, reflecting the peculiar position of Arabic in the Republic of English Letters. Before the late 16th century, the study of Arabic lay outside the humanist conception of the encyclopedia of learning that informed higher education. Only from the 1590s, owing primarily to the reputation of Joseph Scaliger, did it gather momentum, reaching its apogee by the mid-17th century. Such late entry into the universities necessarily relegated Arabic to an ancillary position. Not only did it become the fourth language that the students were now asked to acquire, but it shared nothing of the infrastructure that facilitated the acquisition of the other three, Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. Thus, by the early 17th century, a growing number of students arrived at Oxford and Cambridge well versed in Latin and Greek, in addition to a certain competence of Hebrew. While at the universities, they continued studying the three languages in tandem, under the supervision of tutors and in college lectures. In contrast, no English grammar school, with the exception of Westminster School in the 1650s or 60s, offered instruction in Arabic, nor were virtually any university tutors capable of teaching their tutees, nor did Arabic lectureships were established in the colleges. Would-be Arabists, therefore, were at a considerable disadvantage compared with aspiring Grecians and Hebraists. Furthermore, the absence of early learning opportunities constrained significantly professors of Arabic at both Cambridge and Oxford. University professors, it should be remembered, were expected not to inculcate elementary instruction in the respective disciplines, but to offer more specialized lectures that went beyond college teaching and tutorials. Latham and Wainwright articulated just such a philosophy in 1815 while defending the Cambridge curriculum. And I quote, "It is sometimes asked what useful purpose is promoted by the professorships of Hebrew and Arabic established in both universities when no lectures are delivered on this subject. To this I reply that though lectures are in fact occasionally read on these topics, yet the design of these institutions is not regularly to teach the elements of the language in question, which is best affected by private tuition, but to afford encouragement to the pursuit of an object which presents but few attractions, and to the critical examination of those Oriental dialects which would otherwise perhaps be speedily neglected, if not utterly lost." Wainwright may have been an apologist, but he expounded the commonplace. As noted in a different context by Thomas Hobbes, those who contributed most to the advancement of mathematical sciences attained their knowledge by other means than that of public lectures, where few students and those of unequal proficiency cannot make benefit by one and the same lesson. Indeed, the true use of public professors, especially in the mathematics, being to resolve the doubts and problems as far as they can of such that come unto them with a desire to be informed. The statutes of the Laudian Professorship of Arabic confirm this point. They enjoin the incumbent to lecture for 1 hour on some approved text once a week, in which the proprieties of language and the elegance of expressions are remarkable. And while the professor was expected to give a clear explanation of the words and grammatical meaning of the author and point out that as a reference to grammar and language, the very language of the statute clearly indicates an expectation of prior knowledge on the part of auditors. Even more important than the provision of a weekly lecture are two additional requirements. First, that the professor remain for a while in the school after the lecture in order to respond to any questions on point mentioned in the course of the lecture. And second, more important even, that he shall return to the school for 3 hours in the afternoon, purposely to teach those who choose to attend him for the sake of instruction. He must also at other times show himself easy of access in teaching those who ask his opinion at reasonable times. In practice, therefore, both before and after the institution of Arabic lectureships, private instruction and solitary study remain central for the acquisition of language. The example of John Bainbridge, Savilian professor of astronomy at Oxford, is instructive in this regard. He had recently acquired an Arabic astronomical book, Bainbridge informed James Ussher in October 1626. And while he could perfectly understand the tables in it, the appended rules explaining their use proved more difficult. Nevertheless, such difficulty did so much the more incite me to find out the particular meaning, which is not possible without knowledge in the Arabic. Therefore, I have made entrance into the rudiments thereof, and hope, labore and constantia, at length to be able to translate any Arabic book of mathematics. I know it is a difficult thing which I undertake, but the great hopes I have in that happy Arabia to find most precious stones for the adorning and enriching of mathematical designs do overcome all difficulties. Besides the great satisfaction to see with my own eyes and not to be led hoodwinked by others, who though they may be expert in the tongue, yet without special skill in these particular sciences, cannot truly translate the Arabic. Bainbridge was not a person to proceed piecemeal. Ever decided to undertake the study of Arabic, he demonstrated full appreciation of the best course to follow. He entreated Ussher to supply him with a good copy of the Quran, the only book whereby that language can be attained. The case of Bainbridge, I believe, illustrates the manner in which most English scholars pursued Arabic, independently, though in conjunction with other enthusiasts and with the occasional recourse to native or visiting experts, and through extremely hard work. Glimpses of such difficulties encountered by would-be Orientalists in contemporary literatures abound. As late as 1698, for example, an educational projector who proposed to simplify the acquisition of Latin likened what he considered to be an obsolete method of teaching Latin to what is informing the contemporary teaching of Arabic. And I quote, "If one were to embark on the study of Arabic, armed with an earnest desire, a firm resolution, and the terms of art, would he not become discouraged if his teacher instructed him to get Erpenius's grammar perfectly without a book, and afterwards to fix in his memory 2,000 or 3,000 words out of an Arabian lexicon?" Half a century earlier, Thomas Fuller singled out a key impediment for the acquisition of Hebrew, which applied equally, if not more, to Arabic. More pains than quickness of wit is required to get it, and with daily exercise to continue it. But worst of all, apostasy herein is usual, to fall totally from the language by a little neglect. And of course, I know exactly what he means by that. With such a background in mind, we can attempt to reconstruct the formation of English School of Arabic. And again, I can only give a couple of examples. It probably owed its genesis to Lancelot Andrewes, who entered Pembroke Hall, Cambridge in 1571, already in possession of some fluency in Hebrew, which he had acquired while studying under Richard Mulcaster at Merchant Taylor's School in London. According to his biographer, after graduating BA in 1575, Andrews spent a month in London every Easter term, during which time his father hired local teachers to improve him in arts and languages. One such teacher was John Hopkinson, someone that Orientalists were a little bit miffed about who he was, and I think I was able to find out. whom a later student described as an obscure and simple man for worldly affairs, but expert in all the left-hand tongues. And who had at that time, I mean, the guy was writing 1588, great learned men that consulted him in those languages, and especially Lancelot Andrewes. We may safely assume that Andrewes had improved himself in the Oriental languages, including Arabic, by the time he graduated MA in 1578, because a year later he subscribed his name to a petition urging Secretary of State Sir Francis Walsingham to permit Hopkinson to return to England after he had been seduced by papists and seminaries to go abroad without permit. Andrewes, therefore, may well have been the inspiration behind the determination of his senior colleague at Pembroke, Lancelot Brown, to learn Arabic as he embarked on a study of Avicenna. More importantly, Andrewes launched William Bedwell's career as an Arabist, serving first as a teacher and fellow traveler, and later as Bedwell's chief patron. Andrewes also handed over to Bedwell a massive project he had begun, compilation of an Arabic lexicon. As Bedwell commented years later, the inherent difficulties involved, exacerbated by many other employments, prevented Andrewes from progressing far in the project, and it became instead Bedwell's lifelong ambition. Now, we need not presume, of course, that Andrewes' knowledge of Arabic was, and I quote, so perfect and absolute, both for grammar and profound knowledge in Arabic, as John Buckeridge credited him to have become in all 15 languages that Andrewes purportedly required. Regardless, his continued interest in Arabic and unwavering support of Oriental learning in general proved instrumental for the emergence of English community of Arabists. Now, Bedwell graduated MA from Trinity College in 1588, and though never a fellow, in subsequent years he spent considerable time in Cambridge. Thus, we may safely conclude that already then, Bedwell introduced certain of his colleagues to the study of Arabic. For example, the otherwise unknown John Tichborne, who graduated MA in 1592, who offered instruction in Arabic in the early 1590s to at least one of his tutees, Thomas Comber, who had become master of the college in 1631. So Trinity College, I believe, remains central to the study of Arabic. Abraham Willock matriculated there in 1611, and Herbert Thorndike 2 years later, and that tradition continued. And I cannot do it in this version, but I was able to reconstruct clusters in various places, and I think that we must look at the chronology of the development of the study of Arabic by looking at the careers of certain individuals, where they were and who studied with them. And it was owing to these mutual support groups, as I call them, that Arabic achieved not an insignificant footing in England during the earlier modern period. Now, of course, there are many problems involved. As new research continued to expand our understanding of the scale of the community, the extent of their commitments, or the degree of the proficiency they attained remains a desideratum. Certainly, an assessment is in order, given the penchant for hyperbole on the part of their biographers. And again, I can give only one example of the problems inherent in here. Consider the effusive praises bestowed on Miles Smith, Bishop of Gloucester. According to the divine who preached his funeral sermon in 1624, Smith had been perfect in the Greek, Hebrew, and Chaldee, the Syriac, and the Arabic tongues. 8 years later, the editor of Smith's sermons went further. So conversant he was expert in Chaldee, Syriac, and Arabic that he made them as familiar to him almost as his own mother tongue. Now, Smith almost certainly began studying Arabic only in his late 50s, while living in London and putting the final touches to the King James Version of the Bible. As Josephus Abudaknus intimated to Thomas Urpinius in 1611, Smith had been among those who had approached him for instruction in Arabic. Smith appeared to have made some progress, for already in the previous year, Abu Daknus informed Bedwell his intention to send Smith something in Arabic. Now, Smith evidently continued the study of Arabic until his death, judging by his acquisition of a Phalangius Arabic lexicon and Erpenius Arabic grammar, both published in 1613, as well as Erpenius' edition of the Arabic New Testament and the Arabic Pentateuch, published respectively in 1616 and 1622. Now, only a careful study of his annotations of these books will offer clues to Smith's proficiency. The preliminary results indicate, unsurprisingly, his exclusive concern with the contribution of Arabic to the elucidation of Scripture. What I'll now do is, again, go more quickly and informally on some other issues. Scholars focus until now mostly on the known individuals, the professors, which of course is legitimate and worthy, but I believe it leaves bare the nature and the extent of the community as a whole. What I try to argue, and it will be more evident in the printed version, that introduction to the study of Arabic owed very little to professors. And we must reconstruct how students got that knowledge. And so in that case, it was, the situation is the same before the foundation of the Laudian professorship at Oxford and the Adams professorship at Cambridge, as it was afterwards, both in the 17th and in the 18th century, as I'll point out later. In other words, there existed an important and symbiotic relationship between the independent labors of individuals and the offerings of university professors, visiting experts, and local tutors. And only by looking at such combined efforts will we be able to account for the formation of a very broad body of Orientalists in early modern England, because England, as well as the Netherlands, became the major center for European, or at least Protestant European study of Arabic. Now, insofar as the professors are concerned, several factors are worth bearing in mind. First, that the lectures of the professor were not intended to impart elementary instruction in Arabic, nor were university professors willing to engage in tiresome drudgery usually associated with schoolmasters. And again, a self-example of a schoolmaster in Germany obviously presents some interesting comparison. And I want to provide an analogous case, again using one of the most attractive scholars of the 17th century, Isaac Barrow. When he was appointed Lucasian professor of mathematics in 1664, he gave in his inaugural lecture an explanation of why he abdicated the Regius professorship of Greek he held previously. He accepted the Greek professorship, Barrow stated, when it was desirable to none by reason of the small or even no reward for the vast labor attending it. Now, when others were available, nothing stopped him from following his own inclinations, from changing a heavy labor with very light gain by withdrawing himself from the drudgery of grammar to the more desirable exercises of mathematics. And the point, I believe, is similar for would-be Arab professorships. I mean, it is important to remember, which again I think has not been much discussed, that when Abraham Willock applied Sir Thomas Adams for money, it was not to establish a professorship at Cambridge that he wanted. He wanted money to do research. But Adams he was determined that it will be for teaching. So in a sense, Willock got stuck. And I think part of the problem with the professorship is that you realize that you have a research agenda, that to teach language is difficult under normal circumstances, but to teach Arabic when there is no infrastructure is something as would be saying in German, etwas Besonderes. Okay, so it's a problem. There is, of course, another problem involved with the professor. If you read the statutes of the Laureate professorship, all BAs were required to attend. Now, that's a considerable number of people. It certainly was never enforced. But there is an assumption that the number of people that took these classes was very small. I think, again, this is misguided. And that's why we need to look at some additional detail, and we should not be deceived by various complaints and anecdotes that we have. So, for example, in 1639, Wheelock complained to Thomas Greaves, who was substituting for Pocock at Oxford, on how ashamed he was that so few scholars do Arabicari in this university. Scholars usually cited this to show the small number of people. But the next sentence, Wheelock goes to say that, of course, there are those people that study, and he hopes that they will contribute to the study of Arabic. But then 2 years later, he writes another letter in which he said how gratified he was to see a very large number of people in the audience. And that should teach us, should remind us that the study of Arabic was seasonal. I mean, in certain years you had more students than in others, and an expression made at one time should not make us make general assumption on others. And the best example for that is the famous anecdote about Edward Castell, that allegedly, a professor had to announce in public what is he going to lecture on at a certain time. So Castell hang a post in the schools. The professor went to the desert, i.e. meaning that nobody comes to the classes. So again, we need to bear it in mind. Then there is another element. When resources are available, there is a spike in the number of people that become excited. So when Matthias Passo, for example, comes to Oxford in 1625-26, suddenly there is a general enthusiasm. The enthusiasm is not a function of how good the professor is. I mean, Passo was mediocre, if not less. But what is important, that those private individuals who came to Cambridge or Oxford and managed to sustain themselves to private contributions of students offered precisely the basic introduction that was missing from the official curriculum. So they were able to offer this private tutorial that only by then you can study Arabic, excite individuals to continue with the hard work later. So we have an interesting letter that Thomas Hyde, Laureate Professor of Arabic, writes in 1698, in which he complained that they say, when I started the language, I studied because the natural love and inclination that he had to them. And he claims that students at this time don't have that kind of love. And therefore he feared that there will be, nobody else will be able to succeed him. So again, such statements are an exaggeration. I mean, obviously Hyde did not consider anyone as good as he was. And for that reason, the next generation was lacking. But that is certainly not the case. And I think such statements made us misunderstand the nature of Arabic studies in the 18th century. Because it is certainly true that many of the professors of Arabic in the 18th century were negligent in delivering lectures. But as I mentioned before, that does not mean that other opportunities were not abundant and students studying them. And there is an increasing body of knowledge to show, A, that there is a community that needs exploring, and B, that the perspectives and the reasons for study are changing. Again, we haven't talked much about, it was just mentioned, the theological dimension that was so central for the 17th century. By the 18th century, we see a growing secular interest in the study, and I think that has not been explored. I think one of the more interesting examples is that of James Logan of Philadelphia, who writes a letter in 1724 that I think is quite interesting, not only to the reasons for his interest, but to many other people. As the history of man has of late been a large part of my entertainment, and I would willingly know his humors in all ages and countries, I find I have been too deficient in inquiring into the East, though that appears to us to have been the first seat and nurse of knowledge. I am willing, therefore, to be better acquainted with the Orientals, especially the Arabians, some of whose writings I have, but neglected to purchase some others in London when I was there, being displeased about the price. Fortunately, we have his library, and it's quite interesting, the collection that he did manage, the usual suspects, Gorlius and Erpinus and so on and so forth. But what's interesting with Logan, that he decided to translate the 1594-92 Euclid in the Medician, he decided to translate that into to Latin. And then he complains that the Gorlius and Raphaelengius lexicons that he have are not good for the job because they don't have the technical. So if you look at his books and his annotation, you realize how an independent studies it. And then a couple of years later, he learns that Robert Hunter, who was governor of New Jersey, was in England at the time, and he is studying Arabic by entertaining in his house 2 Arabs who came to England as travelers to see the world. Now, those 2 Arabs are none other than Solomon Negri and Carolus de Decci, okay? So obviously, if you follow those 2 individuals, you realize that quite a few people use them as tutors. In 1764, when William Jones, famous Oriental Jones, come to Oxford, he brings with him an Arab who visited England to serve as his tutor, and so on and so forth. People who came to Oxford or Cambridge to use the resources of the libraries earned their keep by teaching. For example, the 2 most famous ones are John Garnier, who spent years both tutoring as an individual as well as replacing the professor, and the little known Henry Wilde, who is known as the Arabian tailor. Nobody knows how he got his Arabic, but he shows up at the university and he gives tutorials. Unfortunately, as someone who writes about him said, that Garnier used to get the upper class people, and Taylor was forced to get second class. But nevertheless, when he was teaching Hebrew, he charged half a guinea. When he was teaching Arabic, it was a full guinea. Obviously, because there were fewer students who were taking Arabic, so it cost more money. But I'm running out of time, I'm sorry. So I'll stop here. But what I'm trying to say is that we barely began scraping the surface, both in England, in Germany, in Spain. We haven't gotten to France yet, or in Italy. Only by really spreading ourselves, by casting a very, very wide net, we will be able to capture not necessarily very learned, not the Erpinius type, not the Gorlius one, not the Marachi ones, but we will be able to discover that there is actually a very broad community that makes the Gorlius and Erpinius possible. And that's, I think, what the English case can teach us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for revisiting Arabic studies in England and showing us how enthusiasm and gloom intersect here. Especially, of course, the remarks you stressed at the end, the importance of studying the community as a whole, not only the professors, I think will be thought-provoking, and we will also look forward, of course, and myself personally, very much to your analysis of the clusters you sketched. That must be also very fascinating to see how these networks function. I give the floor to you for a few brief questions. Yeah, do not have too much time. Okay. Please.
It's not so much a question as a remark on something that Moti has said, and I think we should pursue that. I am thinking of Orientalism and Said and being all post-colonial or pre-colonial, but I think it's very interesting, or it's been very interesting to see along this day how religion is a reason for the study of Oriental languages, first of all, then how it goes to how you say, skepticism, or how you've said something that after religion, it's not religion anymore. The
more secular interest.
The secular interest, all before any colonial enterprise starts. Right. I think these two ingredients are I found very interesting in this talk, and we have to keep them in mind.
I have a more general question. You mentioned Arab tutors, and I was wondering, are there, and that's a sort of to everyone here. I don't know anything about Arabic and Arabic learning, but I just wonder, were there any Arab travelers through Europe who left accounts, and where would these accounts be right now? Are there, in Africa, Northern Africa, or in the Middle East, are there libraries with all sorts of manuscripts of accounts or travel accounts on the state of Arabic teaching in early modern Europe? Or is this a very stupid question? I don't know about these sources, but just imagine that there must be a whole lot more, like a vision from the outside. Just we're so much talking now about from inside Europe, from like European universities, institutions, European travelers, whereas much of this knowledge came from abroad. So surely there must be, like there are a lot of accounts about the Arab world in Latin. Surely the other way around, there must be sources as well. I don't know what the status of Arabic learning about early modern Europe is at the moment, but I was just wondering.
Yeah. Well, certainly there are some. Before the second half of the 17th century, most native speakers, so to speak, of Arabic or some other dialects were Christians, who somehow or another got to Western Europe. By the second half of the 17th century, there is a growing number of diplomatic and other travelers that begin to show up. And it will be interesting. Right. It will be nice to go to Moroccan archives and see that when they got back to Morocco, whether those stupid Englishmen don't even know how to speak Arabic. So, but I don't know.
Yeah. In addition to this, there is a particular important account of a person who has been mentioned before, this Al-Hajari, who also was an informant to Arpenius, who has written an extensive account of his encounters with students of Arabic in Europe, in France, but he also traveled to the Netherlands and stayed for a while in Leiden, as we mentioned. And he wrote an extensive account about his meetings, and also a little bit about the study of Arabic and in France as well. So there is some, and as Charles mentioned, this book by Nabil Matar, he has translated a number of travel accounts in which you'll find also interesting details. Yeah.
What about Salomon Negri and Dariki? Do we have they left any written records of their experiences?
Yes, there are letters there is material that has not been used yet.
In Arabic or in Latin? Or? Do you know where they are?
I don't remember. I'll have to look.
Yeah. No, these two figures seem to be quite interesting,
Yeah.
because as you mentioned, they really traveled through Europe, and Benedict Michaelis wasn't that? Did not Michaelis, the father Michaelis was taught by Salomon Negri, and they came to England and instructed people here. So that's really really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean George Sale was studying with them as well. So
I think Jean-Paul Robrial is working on them, as far as I know. Yeah.
Thanks very much. And I was very interested in this point that you make about the about communities of scholars learning Arabic, and particularly in the idea that if you go away from a focus on professors, you can begin to see the way that Arabic was continued to be studied by individuals who may not have published research on Arabic studies. And if I understood you, part of your argument was that about the perceived decline of Arabic studies, and that this narrative may be able to be reversed by continuing to look at the ways in which these characters studied Arabic in the 18th century, which I find very convincing. And Johannes Uri is another character in Oxford that I've looked into, who seems to have had quite an active role in teaching Arabic, and also producing some Arabic publications, but is very much off the radar because he didn't occupy one of these official positions.
Yeah.
And yet, to me, that raises another question, in the sense that the standard argument that was put forward by Tuma very convincingly for why Arabic studies declined was not really to do with learning Arabic per se, but it was to do with the fact that many of the reasons which were put forward in the 16th and 17th century to study Arabic in the first place proved to be incorrect, i.e. that there wasn't really much that it would reveal about theology, that experimental science largely superseded what could be found from Arabic scientific texts, and thirdly that attempts to convert Muslims and Christians in the East didn't really work.
Right.
So I wonder whether you have something that specifically speaks to those three arguments, tied to what you're saying about the continued study of Arabic, that would perhaps rethink that broader narrative.
Thank you. As we started discussing about your project, about Abul Fida, there are already, by the second half of the 17th century, increasing number of attempts by the professor and by others to really do secular, what we would call secular studies, right? But the professors are constrained. They're constrained by several factors. They are all ordained. They are often both professors of Arabic and Hebrew, and there are pressures on them from others to participate in their own projects. So, I mean, that's the problem. But when we look closer, we see that there are secular projects, and there are individuals whom otherwise we'd never know. One of my favorites is someone that I discovered, Thomas Lane, who graduated MA from Merton College, Oxford, in 1683. In June of the previous year, i.e. when he was still BA, he writes a letter to a prospective patron that for the previous 3 months he had been hard at work on the Saracen history, which I designed and am advised to compose principally out of Arabian authors, which have so lately been known in these parts of the world that the relations concerning the great empires will be perfectly new. And he continues, Edward Pocock and Robert Walker from University College have promised me to be kindly severe and read it over before it goes to press. A year and a half later, he's still working on this. I mean, what would have been the first history of the Saracen in English. But then he disappears. Nobody knows what happened to his work. And that is, again, a repeated pattern. There are various efforts of individuals to publish, edit a history, poetry, and related subjects that never come into fruition. And the only way we're going to find about them is if we follow those little-known individuals. I mean, there is, Gerald wrote about William Gies, probably the most promising Arabist in the last quarter of the 17th century, who died aged 30. Like many Arabis, by the way, many very talented Arabis died young. He was one of them. And we know that he was planning to do quite a lot about Arabic history, which, whether it still exists or not, we haven't followed. So as the theological element declines, not, by the way, from inaugural lectures, I mean, all the way to the 18th century, professors keep stressing how important Arabic for theology, but in practice, there are a smaller body of individuals who is interested in the language for its own sake, so to speak. And by the 18th century, of course, as Mercedes pointed out, there are other dimensions that go into it. The imperialist ones is also. But so the decline is, in a sense, artificial. It's a decline of a particular worldview about Arabic that is not replaced necessarily, but it's augmented by other considerations, other interests, and it becomes less academic. Simply, again, because the universities had the most impeding aspect of pursuing Arabic at English universities is the fact that if you were at the university, you had to be a fellow of a college. If you were a fellow of a college, you had to be ordained. If you were ordained, then it forced you to follow a particular line of investigation. And that was inauspicious for Arabic as well as for other things. But that's why the availability of those private networks that I described are important in order to understand what's happening outside. And I did not have time to discuss the symbiotic relationship between the universities in London. I mean, it's not just Hopkinson that I mentioned, who is responsible for the emergence of a Cambridge community. It's Bedwell, who is in or near London, that serves as, you know, I think that you pointed at the nice house of Michaelis. We have evidence of aspiring students going and staying for weeks at a time with someone like that. I mean, Pocock goes to Bedwell. And that is the kind of thing that happens time and time again. Okay, so we cannot study them separate. I mean, it's all one community that keeps reinforcing interest, reinforcing ties, and it's a lively and dynamic community, and that's what we need to explore.
Let me. Thanks again, Monica Feingold.